Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lunch Break Science. I'm Ariel Johnson from the Leakey Foundation. Today, we explore what influences primate movement, especially bipedalism. We're excited to have all of you bipeds out there tuning in. Let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat or the video description. Today, Leakey Foundation grantee Dr. Lauren Sarringhaus, who joins us from Harrisonburg, Virginia, in the USA, where they are assistant professor of biology at James Madison University. Lauren studies primate locomotion, and they most recently published a study using video recordings to examine the bipedal behavior of the Ngogo chimpanzees of Kibale National Park in Uganda. This chimp group was made famous by the documentary Chimp Empire, which you should totally check out if you have not already seen it. Lauren is also developing a new project working with spider monkeys in the Osa Peninsula in Costa Rica. These are, spider monkeys are so cute too. We really haven't talked about them before on Lunch Break, so exciting to see them. So let's extend a warm welcome to Lauren. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hello, Ariel. Hello, viewers. Thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about primate movement.
Apes are our closest relatives and are studying their movements, which offer us key insights into human evolution, especially when we think of bipedal walking. What was unique about the way you approached studying bipedal walking in chimpanzees?
Well, most monkeys, they walk with their backs horizontal, with their legs underneath them when they're moving. But apes in general are more upright, even when they're walking on four legs. And they engage in a suite of behaviors that are rare for most monkeys, such as below branch suspension with their arms up. Apes have a more stable lower back, and this allows them to engage in more upright behavior, which lends itself to occasionally walking on two legs, something that we humans do habitually, meaning all the time. However, I think we forget how bizarre it is for humans as four-legged animals to walk bipedally without a tail to help stabilize. And since we do this all the time, I think we forget that it's a little weird, but it's one of the first distinctive characteristic traits that evolved in the human lineage, and we want to better understand it. We want to know under what context did it evolve, because it is so unusual. And so this question isn't new. It's been asked a lot for over 100 years, and some proposed hypotheses include standing up to see better for visibility, standing up to better access food or to forage, standing up to be aggressive, so an antagonism, standing up to free the hands, to engage in tool use or to carry items from one location to another, or standing up to travel more efficiently. This list is not exhaustive. It's contexts that occur in chimpanzee bipedalism, so we're also able to investigate it. The best way to investigate it would be through examining fossils from direct evidence. But the context of locomotor behavior is more difficult to decipher because it is a step removed. So we can also look to our closest living relatives. Chimps are excellent models, not only because of the close genetic relationship, but also because they're frequently going in and out of the canopy. So we can explore bipedalism on the ground and in the trees. Again, we're not the first to ask. It's been explored previously using observational data, and this means scanning at timed intervals and recording what the chimpanzees are doing to get a percentage breakdown or a frequency of the behavior. But in trying to capture the big picture, observational studies need to be biased against rare behaviors, and bipedalism is one of those rare behaviors. So observational studies have found that bipedalism in chimps is mainly pastoral, mainly arboreal, and mainly occurring during foraging and feeding. But however, as researchers, we see them engage in bipedalism on the ground, and we see them engage in locomotor bipedalism and in contexts outside of feeding. But this hasn't been captured in the observational data. So we wanted to come up with a way to really analyze bipedalism, not just the longer bouts that are showing up in observational studies. And so what's unique about this study is that we used a video capture method. So this increases our our sample size and we can capture those shorter bouts in order to analyze. And we can go over the video frame by frame again and again to make sure we're getting at the context that's going on. And because of this, we were able to collect data on bipedalism that included locomotion and included on the ground so that we can analyze a comprehensive picture of what it looks like for chimpanzees to be bipedal so we can try to get an evolutionary explanation for this behavior.
Well, when we think of bipedalism in humans, I think we know what we're, talking about. In your study, what did you consider bipedalism in other primates?
Yeah, that's a great question because chimps are walking on four legs and swinging in the trees in suspension, and they engage in bipedalism, but it's much shorter. And we're using video, so we need to know when the bout starts and when it ends. So our definition needs to be a little more specific. And so we defined it as bearing weight on two legs, as you can see here. And if they're using the arms, they can't be supporting their whole body weight with the arms. But in addition, their torso or their back has to be upright or mostly upright. It can't be horizontal, which is called pronograde. And then in addition, we need to make sure that individuals had their butt above their knees. Otherwise, it could be considered squatting or shuffling, and we didn't want to include that in the data.
Well, thank you, Lauren, for that insightful introduction. Before we dig deeper into Lauren's research findings, a quick reminder to subscribe to our channel and to stay updated on more exciting scientific discussions like this. And be sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. I also want to thank the Ann and Gordon Getty Foundation, Camilla and George Smith, the Joan and Arnold Travis Education Fund, and viewers like you for making today's episode possible. Now, let's turn the virtual floor over to Lauren, and they will walk us through their most recent study using video analysis to explore bipedalism in wild chimpanzees.
Great. Thank you. So I think viewers are familiar with the question now, which is, when does bipedalism occur in chimpanzees, under what context? And we really want to dig in with our data about what factors or variables are associated with the different contexts that we see. So in order to do this, we studied chimpanzees at Ngogo, which is in Uganda, and it's the largest habituated groups of chimpanzees exist there. So we were able to get data on males and females and individuals of different ages. And it's a forested site, so individuals were going in and out of the canopy. So we could test this question both in the canopy and on the ground. We used handheld video cameras and followed the chimpanzees around until they were out of sight, and then we moved to another individual. And in doing this, we got over 400 bouts of bipedalism, which is 4 times the amount of data that had been published using more traditional methods. And so we were really excited that we're able to do an in-depth analysis of bipedalism here. And just so viewers know, when we talk about bipedalism, we're talking about standing and walking in this study. Okay, so first our data, we were able to get individuals of multiple ages. Both males and females are sampled. We have posture, but for the first time, we're going to be analyzing bipedal locomotion in chimpanzees, so we were excited by this. We found that most of the time chimpanzees are using their hands to help stabilize, and it occurred under multiple contexts, including feeding, play, which I did not mention before is one of the hypothesized reasons bipedalism evolved, visibility, and antagonism or aggression, as well as travel. Carrying was not seen a lot in this population of chimpanzees. We were able to get both arboreal and terrestrial data, so we were really excited to also be able to test terrestrial bipedalism in chimpanzees. And so what context did bipedalism occur in? Well, viewers, that this pie is a representation of the breakdown of different contexts, and you can see the color represents the context. So green is foraging, and there's also in the top left a little picture of a chimp engaging in that context. And so this first pie, the numbers represent the percentage of adults that are arboreal in the trees. We find that they're primarily bipedal in the context of feeding or looking for food, which is foraging. And so this is really in line with the behavioral observational studies that have been published, of foraging being a predominant context. When we look at subadults, we see that foraging decreases and that play and travel are much bigger pieces of pie. Now, the next pie I'm going to include is terrestrial, so on the ground, and we see that adults are much more variable on the ground than they are in the trees. That red striped piece is antagonism, so aggression increases, and that blue piece of pie is visibility, so they're standing up to look around on the ground, which they're not doing in the trees. And this is also the case for subadults. You see that play is increasing by a lot on the ground. Visibility is also occurring. And that if you step back and look, what they're doing in the trees or arboreal, the top two, is a lot less varied than what they're doing on the ground. And so we wanted to then ask questions, well, with these different contexts, what variables, so what factors? How does age affect it? How does sex, either male or female? How does mode? And mode means either stationary, so posture, or moving, locomotion, whether or not they're using their hands, and then substrate, which is on the ground or in the trees, and how is this associated with each context? And so to do this, we did a model on each different context. So the first model we did was using foraging, and you can see the variables here on the left. If the box is white, it means it wasn't significant. But if it's dark or light green, it means that these variables are associated with this context. So for foraging, we found that it was associated with arboreality, so in the trees, with older individuals, and with hand assistance. And this is in line with the observational studies. However, in the past, these observational studies, because their data was all postural, have indicated that posture was significant. But when we look here, we see that both locomotion and posture are part of foraging. It wasn't that one was more associated than another. When we look at antagonism, we find that males who are older and moving is associated with antagonism. And this makes sense because adult male chimpanzees display. And so it's in these contexts that they're using bipedalism. Next, we have travel, and females and locomotion are associated with travel. And locomotion makes sense because travel by definition is moving. However, this is the first time that females have been associated with using bipedalism in travel. Last, and from the pie charts, we could already assume, right, that younger individuals are associated with play and that this is also happening on the ground. We could not do a model for visibility because the sample size was too small, but from the pie chart, you'll remember it only occurred on the ground. So it's going to have some association with being on the ground and not in the trees. So what does this mean? It means different factors are associated with the expression of bipedalism in these different contexts, right? Males with aggression, females with travel, arboreality with foraging. And also, this study reinforces the notion that foraging may be a significant factor in bipedal evolution. However, we saw a lot more than foraging in those pie charts, and this study demonstrates that bipedalism may be a product of multiple selection pressures. And if we think about how bizarre moving on four legs is, that maybe multiple contexts were necessary to necessitate the shift of us moving in that direction of moving only on two legs. Furthermore, there's greater variability in bipedal context on the ground, and this is really deserving of future research. This video capture method we used was a great way to try and dig into this rare behavior that it's otherwise really difficult to study, and it's a great complement to traditional observational data methods. It's also a way for data to be more accessible to research for some students, and that students who are not able to travel to locations where primates live or to traverse uneven terrain can ask research questions. And so it can make science a little more accessible. I really want to thank Laura McClatchy at the University of Michigan and Ryan Srivastava, who's an undergraduate here at James Madison University, because they're co-authors on this study. I would also like to thank everyone else involved in this study. And I thank you for listening.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for that really insightful talk. I have so many questions. But first, I just want to give a special call out to our live viewers, Pete, Arlene, Valerie, and Mike. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching, please be sure to drop a comment or question in the chat for Lauren. Lauren, it must have been incredibly fascinating to spend time with these marvelous animals and observe their behaviors. I'm curious, what does bipedalism look like across their various activities?
Yeah, I think we have a few clips. So as we went over the different context, they're bipedal in aggression or antagonism. And so they'll stand up in the context of this. Here you can see an adult male who breaks off a branch and then stands upright to display. We also saw bipedalism occur a lot in the context of play, commonly with subadults. Well, they'll stand up, and this was not a total surprise since subadults tend to move upright in general more than older individuals, and play is a big part of their repertoire. Visibility is another context, so chimps will stand up to see better at further distances, but we saw that that only happened on the ground. They'll also stand up to travel. And yes, they'll also stand up to carry. So here you can see a chimp carrying a root, but this was rare in this population. We thought we would see it more because some other populations of chimpanzees use tools to a further degree than they do at this site.
Oh, it's so neat to see the different behaviors and like really think about bipedalism in those different kind of contexts, especially like visibility, because I feel like, that's what, always thinking about, like standing up in the grasses on the savannah. But I have another question. I was really sparked a lot of, interesting questions. In popular culture, we often see apes moving in a very human-like way, like in Planet of the Apes. What do you think of these depictions compared to what you've observed in the wild?
In general, I think there's room for improvement because often it's humans playing the parts of chimps, and it's humans with extended arms. So in order to have accuracy, these individuals need to walk with bent hip and bent knee gait. So they need to bend their hips and their knee the whole time they walk. And most of the time they shouldn't be as upright as humans. Mm. And that's often where they get it wrong. Chimps they're not as upright. In addition, they need to move side to side just as much as they move forward. And this has to do with the morphology of the pelvis and where the muscles are. But I think we should give Hollywood a bit of a break here. I think, their take home is that in attempting to humanize the chimpanzees, they actually make them pretty bipedal, when in fact, bipedalism is a rare behavior. And most of the time they're quadrupedal or suspensory. And so my biggest issue with watching a lot of the films is how they portray chimpanzees as quadrupedal, because often they'll portray them more like a monkey, a rabbit moves with their arms and their legs, their arms and their legs. And this is called bound, and it happens in chimps, but it's much more rare. Chimps tend to walk quadrupedally like we walk bipedally, and that the left arm and the right leg will move at the same time, and the right arm and the left leg will move at the same time. And you don't see that as much in movies.
You're totally right. I now that I'm thinking about that's definitely how they walk. And you do think about, with those like arm extensions that like their upper arms are like so short and they've got these like ridiculously long like forearms.
But I still watch them. I'm entertained.
Oh yeah. Suspend disbelief, So you're currently branching out to study spider monkeys, which is, again, really exciting. We really haven't talked about spider monkeys before on Lunch Break Science. Tell us what makes them such a fascinating species to study, especially considering human evolution or, in comparison to chimpanzees.
Yeah, great. I really like talking about spider monkeys. I've been lucky enough the past 2 summers to go to Osa Conservation, which is in the Osa Peninsula in Costa Rica, which you showed on the map. And this past summer, I went with 2 students. And, I'm interested in spider monkeys because they share anatomical similarities with apes and humans, such as highly mobile shoulders and highly mobile hip joints and a more stable lower back. And this allows them to be upright, just like apes and humans to some degree, and it translates into them engaging in similar movement, similar variability in their movement, such as putting their arms above their heads while they're bearing weight in suspension. And they also engage in bipedalism. And since these are monkeys of the Americas and not closely related apes, we know that these features are due to convergent evolution, so not genetic relatedness. So it is telling to study the context under which these human ape-like behaviors exist to better get at the conditions that may have selected for the body plan we see in humans and chimps. And we're excited because we're using video capture methods to do this as well.
It must be much different capturing spider monkeys on film than it is chimpanzees.
Yes, in that the spider monkeys are a lot more arboreal. They're predominantly arboreal, and they can be 35 meters up in the canopy, and there can be a lot of foliage, and so it is rewarding, but at times more difficult with the distance that's between me and the animals.
So we are going to get to our viewer questions shortly, and so if you are watching, please start getting your questions in the chat. But first, I want to know what sparked your interest in studying biological anthropology.
Yeah, well, I came into university as a science major, but I took my first introduction to biological anthropology class when I was a first year, maybe a second year, I don't quite remember, but it was so topical and it was so interesting. And the idea that I could have a whole career where I followed around primates in their natural habitat, I was like, sweet, sign me up. So since then, I have known I wanted to be a primatologist. I just haven't always been able to make sure, I haven't always known how to make that happen. But I want to do a shout out to my undergraduate mentors who let me join their lab. And so that was my way in, is Dr. Linda Marchand and Bill McGrew. And because without their guidance, I wouldn't have known how to start down the path to be a primatologist. So thank you.
So now we'd like to hear from our viewers. If you haven't submitted your question yet, get it in the chat right now. Our first question actually comes from our website. It is from Diane, and she asks, are there any implications from your study that could affect conservation efforts for any of the species you've worked with?
Yeah, I think understanding, so a further step back and not just bipedalism, but the more we understand about how animals move and the substrates they're using, the better we can conserve them in general. Like if spider monkeys, for example, are primarily arboreal, and so we're trying to get at what size substrates they're using, when they cross canopies, what degree of cover has to happen so that we can help understand what the forest has to look like in order for them to continue to survive. Because as we move forward, there's going to be more habitat encroachment for many species. And so a better understanding of how they navigate their habitat will help us conserve them.
So we have a comment from Sears James. Hello there. Thanks for joining. About a gorilla in the zoo. You study bipedal behavior in the wild. How does that differ from that we see in captivity?
Well, over time, one of my favorite questions is how, in general, anatomy constrains how we move, but also how we move does influence our anatomy to some degree. And so most primates can be trained to walk bipedally in captivity. And there's a history of macaques in Japan being trained to walk bipedally, and their back curvature changes in time. So over time, they become more upright. And so I suspect that that's probably also the case in captive animals, that with greater practice and doing it for longer, that their morphology changes a bit and their ability to stand up changes. There's a difference too between how gorillas engage in bipedalism and how chimps. Gorillas in general look like they're more upright than chimpanzees do.
That is really, I never, but yeah, you're right. It is very true. Okay, so thank you so much for your question. Our next question comes from Jennifer. And Jennifer asks, is there much size difference between spider monkeys and gibbons?
So spider monkeys feel very much like the gibbon of the Americas to some degree, although they engage in more quadrupedal locomotion. But spider monkeys are smaller than gibbons and siamongs in their body size. But they do both engage in beautiful bipedalism. It's awesome to watch.
Oh,
sorry. I meant they both engage in bipedalism, but I meant brachiation.
Oh.
Which is the beautiful. Bipedalism is fine. I mean, humans are more beautiful bipeds because we're better at it. But in terms of brachiation, that spider monkeys are akin to gibbons and how fluid their movement is.
I'm like, oh, I wish we had like, more video. Again, it's a great topic for another episode. Our next question comes from Pete. Pete asks, are there any other animals that use hands for foraging? That sounds like a major benefit to survival and a driver to bipedalism.
Pete, this is a great question. I don't feel like I am equipped enough to answer it. I think yes, because I can imagine, I mean, the raccoons in my yard and the squirrels, I see them using their hands, but I don't know. I know that their manual dexterity is not as great, but I don't know in terms of them grabbing the objects, or are they using their mouth? I don't know, but excellent question.
Let's see here. Let's see here. When there's a question about walking erect in trees, like how does that like differentiate or differ from walking on the ground?
Yes. So walking in the trees, in terms of performance, we're actually trying to dig into that right now. We're trying to dig into the difference in bipedal performance and with different variables. And so we're not sure. In the trees, hand assistance was part of it. It was like hand assistance was significant when foraging arboreally. So we're guessing that using their hands is going to play a part in this. And maybe that allows them to be more upright with some assistance.
So I think so our next one, I want to ask this is for those who are interested in pursuing a career in science, is there any advice that you have for them?
Yeah, I would recommend two things. One is persistence, just to keep at. If you know you want to do something, even if it means you have to go around roadblocks, I just recommend to just be as persistent as you can, like dealing with not getting the job or not getting the funding, or figuring out how to convince everyone that being a primatologist is or was and is a great idea, just to find that alternative route to get there. And part of that, or the second part of that, is to find mentors. They could be ones that are assigned to you, or they could be people who you encounter or reach out, and just find mentors that are going to have your back and be supportive of you, so that when you're self-deprecating or when you're not feeling very confident, they can be like, yeah, keep going. And that's been really helpful to me. And that's what I would recommend for others.
So we have one final question. It actually comes from our website from David. Did you consider studying any other species of ape or monkey to look up bipedalism? And if so, what were they?
Yes. Also, I mean, people have been looking at capuchins for years to look at how they engage in bipedalism. And so they're another animal that's really a great model because they're in and out of the trees. And people have published extensively on their engagement in this behavior. And so they're a really great model. And last year I was lucky enough to go look at them for a tiny bit.
We have, I don't know if you'd be able to answer this question, but it is an interesting one. It seems a different David. Theoretically, could we swap organs with chimpanzees?
Again, I am not an expert to answer this. I'm just going to wildly guess. But I know clinically people use pig hearts for organ transplants and learning anatomy. And I think that a chimp heart would be an even better option. I think with chimps and other apes, the bigger issue would be blood-borne pathogens, zoonotic diseases that you would have to be more concerned with. But I would expect that a lot of the organs would be analogous.
Yeah, and I think maybe that really is an interesting idea of maybe having an episode focused on on the genetic similarities between humans and chimpanzees. So we will continue pondering into that question, David. Thank you for asking it. So those were all excellent questions, and thank you so much, Lauren, for your comprehensive answers and for joining us here on Lunch Break Science.
Thank you so much for having me. Can I give a shout out to my kids? And thank you, viewers, and thank you for the questions.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you all for taking a break from your day and feeding your brain with the Leakey Foundation. Until next time, stay hungry for knowledge. Lunch Break Science is brought to you by the Leakey Foundation and made possible by the generous support of the Ann and Gordon Getty Foundation, Camilla and George Smith, and the Joan and Arnold Travis Education Fund, as well as viewers like you. Show your support of Lunch Break Science by subscribing to our channel, clicking on notifications, and giving us a thumbs up, or making a donation to help us create new content. Still craving science and can't wait for the next episode? You can feast on the Leakey Foundation's content library with past episodes, lectures, our podcast origin stories, and more. Thank you all for tuning in, and see you next time.